The autumn morning felt different at Kensington Palace. William had noticed it the moment he woke up, though he couldn't quite explain why. The air seemed heavier, charged with an energy that made him restless. He had been looking forward to his scheduled meeting with his father, King Charles, expecting their usual discussion about royal duties and upcoming engagements. As William walked through the familiar corridors of Buckingham Palace, he greeted the staff with his customary warmth. The household members had always appreciated his down-to-earth nature, so different from the formal atmosphere that typically surrounded royal interactions. Today, however, he sensed something unusual in their expressions. The normally cheerful faces seemed subdued, and conversations quieted as he passed. Catherine had kissed him goodbye that morning, mentioning she would spend the day with the children at their favorite park. George, Charlotte, and Louis had been excited about the prospect of a normal family outing, something William treasured more than any state function. These simple moments of family life grounded him in ways that royal protocols never could. The private secretary who escorted him to the king's study walked more slowly than usual. William tried to make conversation but received only polite, measured responses. When they reached the ornate doors, the secretary paused longer than necessary before announcing his arrival. Something was definitely different about this day. King Charles was standing by the tall windows overlooking the palace gardens when William entered. His father's silhouette against the morning light appeared more fragile than William remembered. The king didn't turn immediately when his son entered, which was unusual for their typically warm greetings. "Father, you wanted to see me?" William said, settling into the familiar leather chair across from the king's desk. He had sat in this same spot countless times throughout his life, discussing everything from childhood troubles to the responsibilities that would one day be his. Charles finally turned, and William was struck by the intensity in his father's eyes. There was something there he had never seen before, a mixture of determination and deep emotion that made William's stomach tighten with unexpected anxiety. "William, my dear boy," Charles began, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to fill the entire room. "What I'm about to tell you will change everything. I need you to listen carefully, and I need you to understand that what I'm asking of you comes from a place of love, not just duty." The formal tone was unlike their usual conversations. William had expected to discuss the upcoming state visit, or perhaps review his schedule for the coming weeks. Instead, his father's words carried an ominous quality that made him lean forward in his chair. "I've been doing a great deal of thinking lately," Charles continued, moving to sit behind his desk, "about legacy, about what truly matters, and about the kind of monarchy our family should represent for the future." William nodded, though confusion was beginning to cloud his thoughts. His father had always been passionate about modernizing the monarchy, about making it more relevant to contemporary British society. They had shared many conversations about these very topics. "The decision I've made," Charles said, his hands clasped tightly on the desk, "is not one I've come to lightly. I've consulted with advisors. I've prayed about it, and I've considered every possible consequence." The pause that followed seemed to stretch forever. William could hear his own heartbeat in the silence, and for the first time in years, he felt like a child waiting for news that would change his world. "I've decided to abdicate the throne, William, and I want to do it in a way that will shock the world but also inspire it." The words hit William like a physical blow. Abdication was something that happened in history books, not in real life. Not to his family. Not now, when his father had waited so long to become king and had only just begun his reign. William's mouth opened, but no words came out. He had prepared for many things in his life, had been trained for the eventual transition of power, but not for this moment, not for this sudden shift that felt like the ground disappearing beneath his feet. The king watched his son's reaction with eyes full of compassion and understanding. He knew the magnitude of what he was asking, the weight of the responsibility he was about to place on William's shoulders earlier than anyone had anticipated. "I know this comes as a shock," Charles said gently, "but there's more, William. The way I want to handle this abdication, the final request I'm going to make of you, it's something that has never been done before in the history of our monarchy." William finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Father, I don't understand." "Why now? Why like this?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with years of preparation, expectation, and the sudden realization that everything William thought he knew about his future had just changed in the span of a few sentences. King Charles rose from his chair and walked to a portrait of Queen Elizabeth II that hung prominently on the wall. He stood there for a long moment, as if drawing strength from his mother's memory. William watched his father's shoulders, noting a tension he had never observed before. "Your grandmother ruled for 70 years, Charles said without turning around. "She was the anchor of our nation through incredible change. When she passed, I felt the weight of following in her footsteps, of living up to her legacy." William remained silent, understanding that his father needed to explain in his own way, in his own time. The shock of the abdication announcement was still coursing through his system, making it difficult to process anything beyond the basic fact that his life was about to change dramatically. "But I've realized something in these months since the coronation," Charles continued, finally turning back to face his son. "The monarchy doesn't need another long reign right now. It needs transformation. It needs someone who can bridge the gap between tradition and the modern world in ways I simply cannot." The king returned to his desk, pulling out a thick folder that William hadn't noticed before. The papers inside looked official, formal, and somehow final in a way that made William's chest tighten. "You're 58 years old, father," William said, finding his voice again. "You've barely begun your reign. People expect you to rule for decades. They've accepted you as king." Charles smiled sadly at his son's words. "That's exactly why this decision will have such impact. People expect traditional transitions, natural progressions. They don't expect a king to voluntarily step aside while he's still capable, still healthy, still able to serve." William felt a growing sense of unease. There was something his father wasn't telling him, some deeper motivation behind this sudden decision. "Is there something wrong? Are you ill? Is that what this is about?" "No, William. I'm perfectly healthy, thank God. This isn't about my physical capability to serve." Charles opened the folder and withdrew several documents. "This is about recognizing that sometimes the greatest service a king can provide is knowing when to pass the torch." The papers rustled as Charles arranged them on the desk. William could see official letterheads, legal language, and what appeared to be multiple signatures. His father had clearly been planning this for some time, which made the shock even more profound. "The final request I'm going to make of you," Charles said, his voice taking on a more formal tone, "involves how we handle this transition. I don't want a quiet abdication, a private ceremony, or a gradual handover of duties." William leaned forward, dreading what he was about to hear. "I want to announce my abdication during the Christmas broadcast, in front of the entire Commonwealth. And I want to do it in a way that emphasizes your readiness to lead, your connection to the younger generation, and your vision for the future." The Christmas broadcast was one of the most watched royal events of the year. Millions of people across the Commonwealth gathered around televisions and radios to hear the monarch's message. The thought of using that platform for such a momentous announcement made William feel dizzy. "But father, that's only 2 months away. The preparations alone would be enormous. The constitutional implications, the parliamentary procedures, the public reaction." William's mind was racing through the countless complications such an announcement would create. "I've already begun the necessary consultations," Charles said calmly. "The Prime Minister has been informed. The Archbishop of Canterbury is prepared. The constitutional experts have been working on the legal framework for weeks." William stared at his father in disbelief. "You've been planning this for weeks? And you're just telling me now?" "I needed to be certain of my decision before involving you. I needed to know that all the practical barriers could be overcome before asking you to accept this responsibility." The room fell silent again as William tried to process the magnitude of what his father was proposing. A Christmas abdication would be unprecedented in modern royal history. It would dominate headlines around the world, spark countless debates about the future of the monarchy, and thrust William into the spotlight in ways he had never imagined. "The broadcast would be live," Charles continued. "I would speak first, explaining my decision and my confidence in you. Then you would address the nation and the Commonwealth for the first time as their new king." William's hands were trembling slightly as the reality of the situation began to sink in. He had been preparing for kingship his entire life, but always with the understanding that it would come naturally, gradually, after a long period of his father's reign. What about Catherine? What about the children? They deserve to know about this before the rest of the world finds out during a Christmas broadcast. "Of course," Charles said gently. "That's why I'm telling you now. You'll need time to discuss this with your family, to prepare them for what's coming. Catherine will need to understand that she's about to become queen consort much sooner than anyone anticipated. The thought of telling Catherine, of explaining to George, Charlotte, and Louis that their grandfather was about to make their father the king felt overwhelming. Their children were still so young, still enjoying what little normalcy their royal status allowed. Why Christmas, Father? Why make it so public, so dramatic? Charles stood up again, this time moving to another window that overlooked the palace courtyard. Because, William, I want this transition to be remembered not as an abdication born of scandal or failure, but as a deliberate choice made for the good of the monarchy and the nation. I want people to see that our institution can evolve, can make bold decisions, can surprise them in positive ways. William realized that his father had thought through every aspect of this decision. This wasn't an impulsive choice or a reaction to pressure. This was a carefully calculated move designed to reshape how people viewed the monarchy itself. The drive back to Kensington Palace felt like the longest journey of William's life. Every familiar landmark seemed different now, viewed through the lens of his impending kingship. The weight of the crown that would soon be his felt heavier than any physical object he had ever carried. His protection officers maintained their usual professional silence, but William caught them glancing at him in the rearview mirror more frequently than normal. He wondered if they could sense the seismic shift that had just occurred in his life, or if his expression betrayed the turmoil churning inside him. Catherine was in the garden with the children when he arrived home. The sight of his family, so normal and peaceful, made his heart ache with the knowledge of how dramatically their lives were about to change. George was helping his mother plant bulbs that would bloom in the spring, while Charlotte and Louis chased each other around the oak tree they had climbed countless times. "Daddy," Louis called out, running toward him with dirt-stained hands and a beaming smile. William caught his youngest son in his arms, holding him perhaps a little longer and a little tighter than usual. Catherine looked up from her gardening, immediately sensing something different in her husband's demeanor. After 20 years together, she could read his moods better than anyone. "How was your meeting with your father?" "We need to talk," William said quietly, setting Louis down and ruffling his hair. "Children, why don't you go wash up for lunch? Your mother and I need to discuss something." The children protested briefly, as children do, but eventually made their way into the house under the watchful eye of their nanny. Catherine wiped her hands on her gardening apron and walked over to William, concern evident in her eyes. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." William took her hands in his, feeling the coolness of her skin and the slight tremor in his own fingers. "Catherine, what I'm about to tell you is going to change everything for our family. I need you to sit down." They settled on the garden bench where they had shared so many quiet conversations over the years. The bench had been a wedding gift from his grandmother, carved from wood from the Balmoral estate. Queen Elizabeth had told them it would be a place where they could always find peace together, no matter what storms they might face. "My father is abdicating the throne," William said, the words feeling surreal even as he spoke them. "He's going to announce it during the Christmas broadcast, and he wants me to address the nation immediately afterward as the new king." Catherine's face went through a series of expressions, from confusion to shock to something approaching disbelief. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, processing the magnitude of what her husband had just revealed. Abdicating? But why? Is he ill? Has something happened that we don't know about? William explained everything his father had told him, watching as Catherine's expressions shifted from shock to understanding to concern. She had always been remarkably composed under pressure, but this news tested even her considerable strength. "Christmas," she repeated slowly. "That's only 8 weeks away. 8 weeks to prepare for you to become king and for me to become queen consort. I know how this sounds, how overwhelming it must seem. I'm still trying to process it myself." Catherine stood up and walked to the garden fence, looking out at the London skyline in the distance. William could see her mind working, already thinking through the practical implications, the changes that would need to be made, the conversations that would need to happen. "The children," she said finally. "George is only 11. Charlotte is 9. Louis is just 6. They're so young to have their lives turned upside down like this. That's what I told my father, but he believes this transition needs to happen now, while he's still able to guide and support us through it." Catherine turned back to face him, and William was struck by the strength he saw in her eyes. This was the woman who had stood by his side through every challenge, who had embraced royal life with grace and dignity, who had become the heart of their family. What does this mean for our day-to-day lives? Where will we live? What about the children's schools? What about all the plans we've made? These were the questions that had been racing through William's mind during the drive home. The practical realities of becoming king were staggering. They would need to move to Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle. Their security arrangements would need to be completely restructured. Their children's education would need to be reconsidered. I don't have answers to all of those questions yet, William admitted, but I know that whatever changes we have to make, we'll make them together. As a family, Catherine sat back down beside him, taking his hand in hers. Your father must have given this enormous thought. He wouldn't make this decision lightly, especially knowing how it will affect us and the children. He has. He's been planning this for weeks, maybe months. The constitutional framework is already being put in place. The Prime Minister knows. The Archbishop knows. It's really happening, Catherine. They sat in silence for several minutes, both lost in their own thoughts about the future that was rushing toward them faster than they had ever imagined. The garden around them, their sanctuary, suddenly felt like a place they might have to leave behind. We need to tell the children, Catherine said eventually. They deserve to know before anyone else does, even before your father makes the public announcement. How do we explain to a 6-year-old that his grandfather is giving up being king so that his father can take over? How do we make them understand that their lives are about to change in ways they can't even imagine? Catherine squeezed his hand. We tell them the truth in words they can understand. We tell them that sometimes grown-ups have to make difficult decisions for reasons that seem right to them. We tell them that no matter what changes, our love for them will never change. William felt a surge of gratitude for his wife's wisdom and strength. He had always known that Catherine would be an extraordinary queen, but seeing her process this shocking news with such grace reminded him why he had fallen in love with her all those years ago. There's something else, William said, remembering another aspect of his father's request. The Christmas broadcast will be watched by hundreds of millions of people. My first address as king will be one of the most scrutinized speeches in royal history. Then we'd better make sure it's worthy of the moment, Catherine said with a small smile. We'd better make sure you're ready to show the world the kind of king you're going to be. The family dinner that evening was both ordinary and extraordinary. Catherine had prepared the children's favorite meal, shepherd's pie with vegetables from their own garden, but the conversation that was about to happen would mark a dividing line in their young lives. George, Charlotte, and Louis chattered about their day at school, sharing stories about friends and teachers with the carefree enthusiasm that William knew would soon be complicated by their new reality. He watched their faces, memorizing this moment of innocence before their world expanded in ways that would both privilege and burden them. Children, Catherine began gently, your father and I have something important to tell you, something that's going to mean some changes for our family. Charlotte immediately looked concerned. At 9 years old, she was remarkably perceptive and often sensed adult worries before her brothers did. Are we in trouble? Did we do something wrong? No, sweetheart, nothing like that, William assured her. This is about something that Grandpa Charles has decided to do, something that will affect all of us. Louis, still focused on his dinner, looked up with curiosity. Is Grandpa coming to live with us? The innocent question made William's heart ache. If only the situation were that simple. Not exactly, Louis. Grandpa has decided that he wants to stop being king and he wants me to be king instead. The silence that followed was profound. George, as the eldest, was the first to understand the implications. His face grew serious as he processed what his father had just said. But Grandpa just became king, George said slowly. When great-grandmama died, everyone said he would be king for a long time. Sometimes grown-ups change their minds about big decisions, Catherine explained. Grandpa Charles thinks it would be better for the country if Daddy became king now, while Grandpa can still help us learn how to do the job properly. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears, though she wasn't entirely sure why. Does this mean we have to move away? Will we still live here? This was one of the questions William had been dreading. Their home at Kensington Palace had been their sanctuary, the place where they could be as normal a family as possible given their circumstances. The thought of leaving it behind felt like losing a piece of their identity. We might need to move to a different palace, William said carefully. But whatever happens, we'll still be together as a family. The most important things won't change. Louis, who had been listening with the serious expression he wore when trying to understand complex adult concepts, raised his hand as if he were in school. Does this mean I have to be king someday too? The question hit William like a physical blow. His youngest son was only 6 years old, still believing in fairy tales and magic. And yet the reality of royal succession meant that Louis might indeed face the same pressures that William had grown up with. Someday, a very long time from now, that might happen, William said gently. But for now, you just need to worry about being 6 years old. George had been quietly thinking, and now he looked up with a maturity that sometimes surprised his parents. Will people treat us differently now? At school and everywhere else? It was an astute question from an 11-year-old who had already experienced the unique challenges of being a royal child. George understood better than his siblings how their public status affected every aspect of their lives. Some things might change, Catherine acknowledged, but the people who truly care about you, your friends and teachers and family, they'll still see you as the same person you've always been. Charlotte had been twisting her napkin in her hands, and now she asked the question that went straight to the heart of their concerns. Are you scared, Daddy? About being king? William looked at his daughter, seeing his own fears reflected in her young eyes. The honesty of her question deserved an honest answer, even if it revealed his own vulnerabilities. Yes, Charlotte, I am a little scared. Being king is a very big responsibility, and I want to do a good job for all the people in our country. But I'm not alone. I have Mummy to help me, and Grandpa Charles will still be there to guide us. And you have us too, George added, with the fierce loyalty that had always characterized his relationship with his father. We can help. The simple declaration from his eldest son brought tears to William's eyes. These children, who were about to have their childhood forever altered by the weight of royal duty, were already thinking about how they could support their family through this transition. You're absolutely right, George. Having all of you with me makes everything less scary. After dinner, they moved to the sitting room where the family often gathered for story time or games. Tonight, however, the conversation continued as the children asked more questions about what their new life would look like. Will we still be able to visit Granny Carol and Grandpa Michael? Charlotte asked, referring to Catherine's parents who had always provided a welcome escape from royal protocol. Of course we will, Catherine assured her. Family time will always be important to us no matter what other responsibilities Daddy has. Louis, who had been playing with his toy cars while listening to the adult conversation, suddenly looked up with a bright expression. If Daddy is king, does that mean I'm a prince? You're already a prince, silly, Charlotte told her younger brother with the patient tone she often used when explaining things to him. But will I be a more important prince? Louis pressed, causing both William and Catherine to smile despite the seriousness of the situation. You'll be the same wonderful boy you've always been, William told him. The most important thing about any of us isn't our titles or our jobs. It's how we treat other people and how much we love each other. As the evening wore on, the family talked through many of the practical questions the children had. When would the change happen? What would they call their father now? Would their friends still be allowed to visit? Would they still be able to play football in the garden? Each question revealed how the children were trying to reconcile their existing understanding of their lives with this new reality. William and Catherine answered as honestly as they could, while acknowledging that many details were still being worked out. When it was time for bed, each child hugged their parents a little longer than usual. There was an unspoken understanding that tomorrow would begin a different chapter in their lives, even though the official announcement was still weeks away. As William tucked Louis into bed, his youngest son looked up at him with serious eyes. Daddy, will you still read me stories when you're king? Every single night that I'm home, William promised, kissing his son's forehead. Being king means I'll have to do many important things, but being your father will always be the most important thing of all. The weeks that followed the family conversation passed in a blur of secret meetings and careful preparations. William found himself living a double life, maintaining his normal public schedule while privately preparing for the most significant transition in modern royal history. The constitutional lawyers had been working around the clock to ensure that every legal requirement for the abdication would be met. Parliamentary procedures that hadn't been used for centuries were being dusted off and updated. The complexity of the process was staggering, involving not just British law, but the constitutions of 15 other Commonwealth realms where Charles served as head of state. William's private secretary had quietly begun reaching out to key figures who would need to be informed before the public announcement. The Governor-General of Canada, the Prime Ministers of Australia and New Zealand, and dozens of other officials across the Commonwealth were being brought into the circle of knowledge that grew larger each day. The most challenging aspect of the preparation was maintaining absolute secrecy while making all the necessary arrangements. Speechwriters were working on drafts without being told the full context. Television producers were being briefed on technical requirements for a special Christmas broadcast without understanding its true significance. William's own preparation for his first address as king had become an obsession. He spent hours each day working on the speech that would introduce him to the world in his new role. Every word mattered. Every phrase would be analyzed by historians, constitutional experts, and millions of ordinary people trying to understand what kind of monarch he would be. Catherine had thrown herself into understanding what her new role as queen consort would entail. She met with former private secretaries to Queen Elizabeth II, learning about the protocols and expectations that would soon govern her daily life. The transition from Duchess to Queen Consort involved far more than a change of title. The children had adapted to the news with the resilience that children often display, but William could see the subtle ways the knowledge was affecting them. George had become more serious, more aware of the weight of his position as heir to the throne. Charlotte asked more questions about royal history and protocol. Louis continued to be 6 years old, but occasionally made comments that showed he understood more than he let on. 3 weeks before Christmas, William received an unexpected call from his father requesting an urgent meeting. When he arrived at Buckingham Palace, he found Charles in his study with several senior courtiers, all wearing expressions of barely controlled anxiety. "We have a problem," Charles said without preamble. "There's been a leak." William felt his stomach drop. "What kind of leak?" "Nothing specific yet, but one of the tabloids is asking questions about unusual activity around the Christmas broadcast. They're sensing that something significant is being planned." The private secretary to the king, a man who had served the royal family for over 30 years, stepped forward with a grim expression. "We've managed to deflect their inquiries for now, but it's only a matter of time before someone pieces together enough information to break the story." William sank into a chair, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. If the news breaks before the Christmas broadcast, it will completely change the impact of the announcement. "Exactly," Charles agreed. "The element of surprise, the dramatic timing, the carefully crafted message we've been planning, all of that will be lost if the story leaks prematurely." The communications team had developed several contingency plans for different scenarios, but none of them were ideal. If they were forced to make the announcement earlier than planned, it would disrupt Christmas preparations, interfere with other government business, and potentially create confusion about the timing of the transition. "What are our options?" William asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "We can try to maintain the secrecy for 3 more weeks, knowing that we're risking an uncontrolled leak at any moment," the private secretary explained. "Or we can take control of the narrative and make the announcement on our terms, but earlier than we planned." Charles looked older than William had ever seen him. The stress of keeping such a momentous secret while preparing for its revelation had clearly taken its toll. "I'm inclined to stick with our original plan. The Christmas broadcast has such symbolic power, such reach and impact. I don't want to lose that unless we absolutely have to. But if the story breaks in the tabloids first, it will be presented as a crisis or a scandal," William pointed out. "People will wonder what we're hiding, why we didn't trust them with the information sooner." The debate continued for over an hour, with various advisors presenting arguments for different approaches. The constitutional implications of each option were complex, and the political ramifications were significant. This wasn't just a family decision anymore. It was a matter of state that could affect the stability of the monarchy itself. Finally, Charles made the decision that only he could make as the sitting monarch. "We proceed as planned. We maintain the secrecy for 3 more weeks, and we make the announcement during the Christmas broadcast as originally intended. And if there's a leak between now and then," William asked, "then we deal with it as it happens." but I believe the risk is worth taking for the impact we can achieve with the Christmas announcement." As the meeting concluded, William realized that the pressure he had been feeling was nothing compared to what was coming. The next 3 weeks would require perfect execution from dozens of people, absolute loyalty from everyone in the know, and more than a little luck to keep one of the biggest royal secrets in modern history from breaking prematurely. On the drive home, William called Catherine to update her on the situation. Her voice was steady as always, but he could hear the concern beneath her calm exterior. "Whatever happens, we'll handle it," she told him. "But 3 more weeks of this level of secrecy is going to be incredibly difficult." "I know. And the children are starting to ask questions about why we're having so many private meetings, why there are more security people around the house." That evening, as William tucked George into bed, his eldest son looked up at him with an expression far too mature for an 11-year-old. "Daddy, is everything going to be okay? You and Mummy seem worried about something." William sat on the edge of his son's bed, choosing his words carefully. Sometimes when big changes are coming, grown-ups worry about making sure everything goes smoothly. "But yes, George, everything is going to be okay. Will you tell me if it's not okay? I don't like it when adults pretend everything is fine when it's not." The honesty of his son's request struck William profoundly. Here was a boy who would one day face the same pressures, the same impossible balancing act between public duty and private truth. "I promise you, George, that I will always tell you as much as I can about what's happening in our family. Sometimes there are things I can't share right away. But I will never lie to you about whether or not we're going to be okay." As William left his son's room, he realized that the next 3 weeks would test not just their ability to keep a secret, but their ability to maintain their family's stability in the face of unprecedented pressure. Christmas Eve arrived with an unusual tension hanging over the royal household. The final preparations for the broadcast were being completed under extraordinary security measures. Camera crews had been brought in under the guise of updating technical equipment for the traditional Christmas message, unaware that they were about to film one of the most historic moments in modern royal history. William woke before dawn, unable to sleep despite his exhaustion. In less than 18 hours, he would address the nation and the Commonwealth as their new king. The speech he had worked on for weeks was memorized, but the magnitude of the moment made his hands shake as he reviewed his notes one final time. Catherine was already awake beside him, staring at the ceiling in the pre-dawn darkness. They had talked late into the night about everything and nothing, both of them aware that their old life was ending and their new one was about to begin in the most public way imaginable. "Are you ready?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper in the silence of their bedroom. "I don't think anyone could be ready for this," William replied honestly, "but I'm as prepared as I can be." The children had been told that this Christmas would be different, that they would need to watch the Christmas broadcast together as a family, and that there would be some special announcements. They had accepted this with the adaptability that had served them well throughout their young lives in the public eye. By mid-morning, the technical preparations at Windsor Castle were complete. The room where the broadcast would take place had been arranged to look traditional and reassuring, with the Christmas tree providing a familiar backdrop that millions of viewers would recognize from previous years. Charles had been unusually quiet all morning, reviewing his own notes and speaking in hushed tones with his most senior advisors. The weight of what he was about to do was evident in every line of his face, but his resolve remained firm. The Prime Minister arrived for a final briefing, along with the Archbishop of Canterbury and several other officials, who would play crucial roles in the constitutional transition. The complexity of changing monarchs was staggering, involving everything from new currency designs to updated passports for diplomatic staff. "The succession will be immediate upon your abdication," the constitutional lawyer explained to Charles during the final briefing. "The moment you sign the instrument of abdication during the broadcast, William becomes king. There's no gap, no interim period." William felt a chill run down his spine. In a matter of hours, his father would sign a document that would transfer the weight of a 1,000-year-old institution to his shoulders. The crown that had sat on Elizabeth II's head for 70 years, that had briefly rested on Charles's head, would become his responsibility. The family gathered for lunch, though none of them had much appetite. The conversation was stilted, filled with the kind of small talk that people make when they're avoiding discussing the enormous elephant in the room. Will we watch the broadcast together? Charlotte asked, breaking through the artificial normalcy of the conversation. Yes, darling, Catherine replied. We'll all watch together, and then we'll spend the rest of Christmas Day as a family just like always. Louis, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly looked up from his barely touched sandwich. After today, do I have to call Daddy, Your Majesty? The question brought a brief smile to William's face, the first genuine expression of joy he had felt all day. No, Louis, to you I'll always just be Daddy. As the afternoon progressed, the tension in the castle became almost unbearable. Television crews were setting up their equipment, unaware that they were about to witness history. Security had been quietly increased, though in ways that wouldn't attract attention from the media or the public. At 4 o'clock, William received a text message that made his blood run cold. It was from his private secretary, tabloid making inquiries about special announcement in tonight's broadcast. So far we've contained it, but they're getting close. The news meant that they were racing against time. If the story broke in the next few hours, it would completely change the impact of the announcement. Social media would explode with speculation, and the carefully crafted surprise would be ruined. William showed the message to Catherine, who read it with growing concern. Do we tell your father? Not yet. There's nothing he can do about it now, and it will only add to his stress. At 6 o'clock, the final technical checks were completed. The broadcast would begin at 3 o'clock, reaching audiences across different time zones when they would be most likely to be watching. The timing had been calculated to maximize the global impact of the announcement. Charles appeared in the doorway of the family sitting room, dressed in the formal attire he would wear for the broadcast. He looked every inch the king, but William could see the emotional toll of the day in his father's eyes. It's time, Charles said simply. The family made their way to the broadcast room, where the familiar setup awaited them. The Christmas tree stood in the background, decorated with the same ornaments that had appeared in royal Christmas broadcasts for decades. The desk where Charles would sit was the same one his mother had used for her final Christmas message. The television producer, still unaware of what was about to happen, ran through the final technical details. The broadcast would be live to most of the Commonwealth, with only a few countries receiving a slightly delayed feed due to technical considerations. Your Majesty, we'll begin with your traditional Christmas message, and the producer explained to Charles. The teleprompter is ready and we have backup systems in place. What the producer didn't know was that the teleprompter had been loaded with a completely different speech than anyone expected. Instead of the usual Christmas greetings and reflections on the year past, Charles would deliver the most shocking royal announcement in generations. William took his position off camera, where he would wait for his father to complete the abdication announcement before stepping into view to address the nation for the first time as king. His own speech, which would follow immediately after Charles's, had been carefully crafted to reassure the public while acknowledging the unprecedented nature of the transition. At exactly 3 o'clock, the red light on the camera illuminated, and King Charles III began what would be his final address to the nation as monarch. My dear people of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth, he began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to say. I speak to you today not only with Christmas greetings, but with news that will, I believe, mark a new chapter in the long history of our monarchy. Around the world, millions of people were settling in to watch what they expected to be a traditional Christmas message. They had no idea that they were about to witness the end of one reign and the beginning of another. After much reflection and prayer, Charles continued, I have decided that the time has come for me to step aside and pass the responsibility of the crown to my son. William. The silence in the broadcast room was deafening. Even the technical staff, who had worked on royal broadcasts for years, stood frozen as they realized they were witnessing history. The moments that followed Charles's abdication announcement felt suspended in time. William watched his father sign the instrument of abdication on live television, the scratching of the pen audible in the silence of the broadcast room. With that signature, William became king, though the full weight of the transformation hadn't yet settled on his shoulders. Charles completed his portion of the broadcast with dignity and grace, explaining his decision to the stunned viewing audience and expressing his complete confidence in William's ability to serve as king. When he finished speaking, he looked directly at his son and nodded, a gesture that somehow conveyed both farewell and welcome. William stepped into the camera's view, feeling the eyes of hundreds of millions of people around the world focusing on him. The man who had woken up that morning as the Prince of Wales was now addressing his subjects as their king. "My fellow citizens of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth," William began, his voice stronger than he had expected it to be. "I accept the responsibility that has been passed to me today with humility, determination, and an unwavering commitment to serve you all." The speech that followed had been crafted over weeks of careful consideration, but standing there in front of the camera, William found himself speaking from the heart as much as from his prepared text. He talked about continuity and change, about honoring the past while embracing the future, about the values that would guide his reign. "I come to this role not as a distant figurehead, but as a father, a husband, and a man who has spent his life preparing to serve. Catherine and I, along with our children, pledge ourselves to the service of our nation and the Commonwealth with the same dedication that my grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, showed throughout her remarkable reign." Around the world, television newsrooms erupted into controlled chaos as journalists scrambled to process and report on the unprecedented announcement. Social media platforms crashed under the weight of millions of people sharing their shock and amazement. The carefully kept secret had been revealed in the most dramatic way possible. In the broadcast room at Windsor Castle, the technical staff worked with professional efficiency, despite their obvious amazement at what they had just witnessed. This was the story of their careers, and they were the ones making it possible for the world to watch history unfold in real time. When the broadcast concluded, William felt a strange mixture of relief and terror. The secret was finally out, the transition was complete, and he was now King William III. But the real work was just beginning. Catherine was the first to reach him as he stepped away from the camera, her arms encircling him in a hug that spoke of shared understanding and mutual support. No words were necessary. They both knew that their lives had just changed forever. Charles approached his son with tears in his eyes, but his expression was one of pride rather than sadness. "You did beautifully, William. Your grandmother would have been so proud." The children, who had watched the broadcast from another room with their nanny, came running in with excitement and confusion in equal measure. They had understood that something monumentally important had just happened, but the full implications would take time to sink in. "Daddy, are you really the king now?" George asked, his voice filled with awe. "Yes, George, I am. And someday, many years from now, you'll understand what that means for you too." Charlotte hugged her father tightly, as if she could somehow protect him from the enormous responsibility he had just accepted. "Will you still be our daddy even though you're the king?" "Always," William assured her. "Being your father is the most important job I'll ever have." Louis, practical as always despite his young age, looked around the room at all the cameras and technical equipment. "Did everyone in the world just watch our daddy become the king?" "Pretty much," Catherine answered with a smile. "It's going to be quite an adventure for all of us." The immediate aftermath of the broadcast was a whirlwind of activity. Constitutional procedures that had been set in motion weeks earlier now moved into their final phases. Official notices were being posted, government departments were being notified, and the complex machinery of state was adjusting to its new monarch. The Prime Minister called within minutes of the broadcast ending, offering formal congratulations and requesting an audience with the new king as soon as possible. Similar calls came from heads of government across the Commonwealth, all of them still processing the shock of the unexpected transition. Media from around the world had descended on the area around Windsor Castle, though they were kept at a respectful distance by security cordons. The story was already dominating news cycles globally, with constitutional experts and royal commentators trying to explain the historical significance of what had just occurred. As the evening progressed, the family tried to maintain some sense of normalcy, despite the extraordinary circumstances. They had Christmas Eve dinner together, opened a few presents as was their tradition, and attempted to create the kind of family moments that would become even more precious in the years ahead. But the weight of what had happened was impossible to ignore completely. Phone calls from world leaders continued throughout the evening. Urgent briefings needed to be scheduled for the following day. The transition from prince to king involved thousands of practical details that would need attention in the coming weeks. That night, as William lay in bed beside Catherine, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. From the morning when his father had shocked him with the news of the abdication to this evening, when he had addressed the world as king, everything had happened with breathtaking speed. "Are you okay?" Catherine asked quietly in the darkness. "I think so," William replied honestly. "It's strange. I've been preparing for this my entire life, but I never imagined it would happen like this." "Your father was right about one thing," Catherine said. "The way he did it, the surprise and the drama, it will be remembered forever. People will talk about this Christmas broadcast for generations." William thought about the children sleeping down the hall, about the life they had known, and the life that awaited them. George would grow up knowing that he had witnessed his father become king, that he had been part of one of the most remarkable moments in royal history. "Do you think we'll be able to handle all of this?" William asked, voicing the fear that had been with him since that first shocking conversation with his father. Catherine turned to face him in the darkness, her voice filled with the certainty that had always been one of her greatest strengths. "We'll handle it together one day at a time. We'll make mistakes, we'll learn. We'll grow into these roles just like everyone else who came before us." Outside their window, William could see the lights of the media encampment that would become a permanent feature of their lives. The privacy they had cherished was now a thing of the past, but the love and support of their family would remain constant. As Christmas Day dawned, King William V woke to face his first full day as monarch. The weight of the crown was still settling on his shoulders, but he no longer felt overwhelmed by it. His father's surprising final request had indeed left him deeply shaken, but it had also prepared him for a future he was ready to embrace. The story of how William was taken by surprise by King Charles's final request would become part of royal legend. But the real story was just beginning. The reign of King William V had started not with the traditional pomp and ceremony, but with a family's love, a father's wisdom, and a son's courage to accept the responsibility of a lifetime.